Good evening. Today is Tuesday, May 18th. Want to welcome everyone out to tonight's edition of our Planning Commission meeting. Thank you to those that are joining live here at the city offices, as well as all those who are participating via technology through the YouTube site. Just to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and everything is part of the public record. So please be aware of that. Tonight's agenda comprises 3 items. We do not have our minutes to review from April's meeting. We will review April and May minutes next month. So the 3 items on the agenda tonight is we will have a public hearing for an amendment that we've received via application to change the zoning of the middle school property from residential to general commercial. This is the property located at 115 East Young Street. The second agenda item will be to discuss the concept discussion for a multifamily housing project located at 127 East, 100 North. And then we will continue with agenda item number 3, which is to focus on some of our mixed use considerations. It's an ongoing conversation and project with the city. So we'll take these agenda items in that order. Prior to opening up the public hearing, I want to set just a little bit of the background to this project. And of course, the project is related to there's right now, I think 3 or 4 property owners on the block of the middle school. There's the school district, then there's the seminary building. There's most of the development on the west side of that block, with the exception of where the photography studio is, and that's all of the commercial side of it is subject to buffering with any adjacent properties with residential. And since the school district property is zoned residential, it limits some of the commercial development that can take place due to those buffering restrictions. It creates more commercial opportunity, and if the zoning is changed, and that's the argument that's before the commission tonight as we look at evaluating this. So I'm going to turn some time over to Weston Apollonie to provide some additional context to this. I would then like to hear a representative from the school district. I think we have Scott McMillan here tonight to speak on that, and then we can move into the public hearing session of this agenda. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commission. The proposed request before you today is for the Morgan Middle School to be rezoned from the current zone of R18 to CG, which is general commercial. The use of the property is not changing. There are no plans for the middle school property to be sold. This is merely a proactive request. It is also mutually beneficial that if and when the property ever does become to a point where the school district does want to sell, it would be at a higher value for them. It also puts in a large commercial portion, which is in the center of the city, a commercial network or a commercial node for the city that would be significant. It also affects current property owners. There's a property owner on the corner of Young Street and State Street that has interest in expanding and is dealing with current buffering issues that are between the R18, which is a single family residential zone, and the commercial. If the school district property was rezoned to a commercial, there would not be buffer requirements, and allows the existing property owner a little bit more flexibility in expanding or building what he's looking at doing. Although that's not before us today, that's just some insight on what the surrounding property is, and there's not been a proposal exactly on what he's looking to do. The planning staff recommends the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council to rezone this request.
All right, thank you for that. And just as a matter of housekeeping, we are using some new technology tonight, and that requires us here in the room to remember to unmute our microphones before speaking. Otherwise, those of you that are attending remotely will not hear. So It's a new habit we're trying to develop. If we forget to do that and you can't hear us, let us know so that we can make sure that everyone can hear the discussion that's taking place. That being said, let's turn some time over to Mr. McMillan.
Thank you. Yeah, Weston really covered the issues really well from our perspective. I might just add a couple of points on the north side of the property there. When the car wash was developed, we did work with the property owner there in a lease where we leased a strip of property of the school to accommodate that buffering. It seems like this would maybe be a better solution than that lease that we did in the past. And we would just want to be supportive of those things that would be helpful to developing commercial property and developing business and the tax revenue that would come from that.
Thank you for that. Do we have any representation from the commercial side of this with Mr. Smith or anyone from there that's participating tonight to get that perspective? I'm seeing some head shake, not seeing anyone on the Zoom jumping in. All right. Well, at this time, I would entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to open the public hearing for the middle school rezone.
Thank you. Do we have a second on the motion?
Second on the motion.
Public hearing is now open. I don't know how many people we have in there. We've got 6 participants through technology. Looks like those are all staff or commissioners. So let's go ahead and we have, I think, 1 or 2 people in the room that may jump in on this before we take it up as a commission and discuss the issue. Public hearing is now open. Steve, just as a matter of, do we need to vote on that? We've got the second. Do we just clarify for me if we vote?
Yes, it would be, you would take a vote.
So let's go ahead and vote to open the public hearing. Those in favor of the motion as outlined. All right, so that anyone not in favor. I saw all hands. Let's move forward. Public hearing is now open. Anyone interested either through technology or here live in the room, feel free to take a few minutes and share your thoughts, state your name and some of the issues and concerns that you may have with respect to what you want to share about this proposed rezone request. The time is now for the public to jump in and share those comments. I was going to say, this is not the archetype of all public hearings. For those of you that might have heard that or might not, Teresa was mentioning we did not receive any emails or comments ahead of the meeting. And I'm not seeing anyone in the room that's jumping in. We can discuss as a commission while the public hearing's still open, just in case somebody jumps in. And otherwise, let's discuss this for a moment. We'll leave the public hearing open while we have our conversation amongst the commission, and that way we don't need to reopen the public hearing if somebody else comes on. And then we'll close the public hearing if no one's come on prior to making a motion one way or another on this. So with respect to what's being proposed and what the applicant's asking for to rezone this residential property being used by the middle school today to commercial, what planning considerations or comments do members of the commission have?
Mr. Chair, I'll just echo what I said in the work meeting. I think this is a good move to get this piece of property tied up as commercial. I mentioned the age of that building being probably close to 30 years, with much of the buildings much older than that. It may be sooner than we know, where that property may be more valuable than building or adding on to the school. And I think this is a good move for future.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Other comments?
For the sake of taking up a little extra time for public comment on this, I think it's a great move as well, because as we've talked about on numerous occasions, we want to encourage more commercial development. We want to encourage more opportunities for the city to grow and develop and move forward, not just in residential development. And anything that we can do as a commission to forward those recommendations on to the city council is, in my opinion, very positive. So I'll just add that 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Reese. I like the kind of the bias towards, focusing on some of that type of growth, that economic growth, the commercial growth. And in our work session, Mr. Apolloni mentioned, we've got developers that are willing to invest in our city, and that's a good thing, and promotes that kind of growth and that healthy economic base as well. I like that. The one question that I have is there a challenge with a precedent here where, even though it is mutually beneficial for the school district and for this developer, and therefore it's good for the city too, at least that's how it feels. Does it set a precedent that we're accommodating, a particular developer's needs that might, that I don't know what the right word is, might enrich somebody? And I just want to make sure that we're applying consistent principles as we do this. Is there any concern with that at all, that we're overly accommodating, one particular person, and as long as we're consistent with planning principles, then we can stand on that. I just want to, air that out and make sure that we feel good about that. Is there any concerns with that for the future? And I'd be looking for somebody from staff to maybe weigh in on that.
I personally don't have any concerns. Mr. Garside may have something. I would say that this is, as stated in the staff report, is mutually beneficial for the school district and the city. This is a significant portion of commercial space that would be at the center of the city and allows for development. As we move forward with the general plan, if details or zoning needs to be changed to a mixed use to accommodate something that fits more better with what the city's vision is when that's completed, we can look at that. But based on the information provided, I see no conflict and see it as a benefit.
Yes, thank you, Weston. I think that we have to remember that in addition to planning principles, as we review these, we have to ensure, consistency, as you stated, but primarily driven by the general plan. And if it's consistent there, and it consistent with the surrounding zoning, those are kind of your milestones that you want to look at as you go forward. And obviously, when we have commercial against residential, there's some steps that need to be taken to make sure that they're appropriately protected and buffered, and so your ordinance has that. Our ordinance has that, and so whether it's beneficial or not, that's always something that is there, but not our primary concern. It is consistency, but that consistency is more, as I stated, following our ordinance and the general plan. And of course, when you address these issues, you want to look at all things on the table. Is this, again, this is consistent with the general plan as going forward? Are there maybe some incremental steps that we'd rather do? I mean, obviously, Mr. McMillan talked about that they did a lease arrangement so that they could accommodate the car wash. Beyond that, I mean, the city could also entertain amending its setback and buffering ordinance from commercial to residential when that residential property is occupied by, and then you could address those type of issues. And so the options are before you, but back to your question, Mr. Chair, those are the things that would direct your decision, is consistency with the general plan and the surrounding uses. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you keeping us grounded and love the way that you bring us back to the ordinances, which is our responsibility. Other comments from anyone, really? Ty, go ahead.
Just along with that, I don't view this as valuing one zone over another, or I just look at that setback. The intent is to protect commercial or protect residential from neighboring commercial. So we're protecting zones and not actual entities or residents on this property. And so that's the consistency, is it's not going to apply that way across the board when you have a commercial zone next to a resident. And I don't think we would want to get rid of that buffer requirement when it applies. So just back to the ordinance, that's kind of just my view of what we're talking about here, not that we're valuing one zone over another. And the applicant went back and they went through their own process and decided it was best for them to request their entire parcel zoned. And so knowing that both sides of this property boundary is in concurrence just makes it that, you know, we don't always get a win-win when you apply, you know, planning and zoning. And in this case, I think it makes sense for the city and both applicants.
So thank you. Question for Mr. McMillan. Right now, the boundary of that commercial property and the bus lane that goes through on that west side of the school district property, there's about 20 to 30 feet of grass before the asphalt. Is there any conversation? Is this something that you would be looking at selling to the commercial owner at this point? I know in the notes it says this is proactive and there's no plans right now to sell the property as a whole, but are there plans to kind of work through property in pieces?
You know, we've had no conversations with any party about any sale of that. And we did do the lease, and that seemed to not be negatively impacting the school in any way, but there haven't been any conversations either internally or with an external party about that.
Thank you. I'm still seeing we're static at 6 participants online, and no one else has joined us here in the room. What other comments or considerations do we have before we formally close the public hearing?
I've got a question maybe for Steve, and it's more general than anything, Steve, and kind of references back to one of the chair's comments there. But regardless of a decision on zoning, that does not, and the decision that's made at the moment does not influence or set precedents for other decisions down the road, even if they were similarly situated and a different decision was made. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. Each one has to stand on its own.
Thank you.
Mr. Alexander, just related to that, was that leading towards a different comment, or you just want to make sure they independently stand on their own?
Yeah, exactly. Just the latter there. And I think it helps answer your question on precedents.
Yeah, it is helpful. Thank you for clarifying. What else?
Mr. Chair, can I make a motion to end the public hearing?
We have a motion on the table to end the public hearing. Do we have a second on the motion?
Second it.
Is that Jay?
Dan.
Oh, sorry, Dan. All right. Thank you, Dan. We have a second on the motion. Any discussion before voting on the motion? All right. All in favor of closing the public hearing, please indicate. Looks unanimous. Thank you. Public hearing is now closed. As a commission, the responsibility before us then is to forward a recommendation to the city council based on the evidence that we've been hearing. And that recommendation can either be to that we recommend the city council move forward with the zoning change as outlined or not. And so that's really the action before us, is to make a motion one way or another based on what we've heard, and that will then be taken to the city council. So let's open it up for that action now based on what we've heard.
Mr. Chair, I move that the commission move this item forward favorably to the city council.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkin, recommending a positive recommendation to the city council. Do we have a second on the motion?
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and well, before voting, any comments or discussions with the motion? Nothing from Dan online. I'm not seeing, so everyone else in the room's quiet. Let's go ahead and vote. All in favor of moving forward with the positive recommendation to the city council, indicate. And anyone not in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. Motion passes. Positive recommendation forwarded to the city council to rezone the property, the school property at 115 East Young Street from residential R18 to general commercial. We'll now move to our second agenda item, which is a concept discussion for a project that's actually adjacent to this middle school property. This is located at 127 East, 100 North. There's an existing use on this property today, and the motion is to move forward with a multifamily housing project, a fourplex that would, for those of you online, you can see property 127. That's the property that we're speaking of. There's a lane immediately to the, I think that's east of that property. That's a flag lot back to 129. And then the school district owns the property on the other side of the lane. And the planning considerations here are, to accommodate a private driveway outside of that lane. So that lane is not part of this project, but to accommodate a driveway as currently drawn on the plans on the east side of the development. So right next to the lane, and then have a fourplex that's a side entry fourplex as seen in this drawing here. So hopefully everyone can see what the project is. We do, I believe, there's one person in the room I don't recognize. I imagine you're from the development. So we have a representation from the development to share some comments on this. I'll give him some time to do that. And I believe that he's been made aware of some of the setback challenges with the concept plan as drawn currently. So to outline those challenges, I'm going to turn some time over first to Weston Apolloni to do that. And then we'll hear from the developer and then we'll take this up as a commission from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a good description. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a good description of the project. The proposed plan would be accessed through a 26-foot private lane. That private lane, city standards require the buildings be pushed back and have a 25 to 30-foot driveway. The difference there is it's 25 feet if it includes, this private lane includes a sidewalk, it's 30 feet if it does not. There are minor other setback issues that I think could easily be addressed, but that's the biggest one and the hurdle for the project. There's also a parking concern. The ordinance requires there be 2 guest parking stalls. The parking code requires that there be 2 parking stalls per unit, one that's covered and the other not within 5 feet of the front entrance. Typically, the driveways act as that second stall requirement. So solving the one should solve the other.
Thank you. And then with respect to the development, if you wouldn't mind stating your name for the record, and then sharing some perspective about the project for us. That'd be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, well, my name is LeGrand Bunker. I am representing Michael Engel, who's a fairly prominent community member, as many of you know of him. Also in collaboration with Jerry Pierce. They're the ones who reached out to me. I'm a licensed general contractor here in the state of Utah. And so we're just helping Mike in kind of doing some of what he wants to do there. So we understand, obviously, getting 4 units there is quite tight. It's very evident. And we did receive the review from the Planning Commission. Thank you for your review. And so as far as sharing a perspective on our side of things, again, like I've expressed, I'm just here representing the owner of the property and what he wants to get done. And so I think one of our biggest questions in regards to setbacks and the required widths and so on for private lanes and so on is just to consider what options might be on the table. And let's be as frank as possible. If 4 units is way too many to fit in there, that's fine. I can easily relay that message. If there's a creative way we can get the correct driveway widths and sizes, I'm all ears. But the biggest question, I guess, obviously, you can see we're working with a roughly 90-foot width overall on this small lot, with the roughly 25 plus 25, or potentially even 30 plus 30. We're looking at more than half that lot was going to be driveways and private lanes, which again, I totally respect. I've had multiple conversations with Teresa. Totally respect the reason for the planning and zoning. So I'm not by any means have any sort of malice in what I bring here today, but it's just so it looks as though to me trying to orient the units in this way more or less could be off the table. We've discussed potential of purchasing that lane that is to the flag lot in the back. The problem being there is if we do 4 units, that would in fact limit that property owner to any sort of subdividing or adding a dwelling there because of the 5 units per private lane requirement that is in the municipal code. So that's why we didn't approach it in that way. Obviously, there's a lane right there. It would function perfectly for that purpose, and that would give us plenty of space. But I don't think that's on the table necessarily. Although we may make an inquiry to the owner back there to see if that'll work. But I'm not, holding my breath for that. The only other creative solution that might work is if rather than have a general footprint for these 4 units be so square, is to recess where the garage enters, so that you almost create a you kind of have a dental, inset where the garages are, and keep as much floor plan as possible. If we did something like that, we might not, instead of going from 2-car garage, we would go to a single-car garage. So you have less of the building footprint that would insert, but I don't know if that would hit the requirements. I tried to look it up on the municipal code. I didn't have a lot of time to research it, but that's the only other creative solution I could think of, is that we push the garage door in, and therefore the building footprint where you see those number 2s would be pulled back to the required distance from the private lane. So that's kind of that's what I got, I guess.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. I want to touch on 3 things, and we'll open it up for discussion. One is the concept of potentially working with the owner of that lane, and I think you used a phrase that'd give you enough space to kind of do what you're looking to do. In our working session, we discussed that as well. I don't know if you were here for all of that or any of that, but it sounded like even that option, based on having to make that a 60-foot wide road, and you still have the setback requirement, might actually take more space. Does that sound accurate, Weston? If you wouldn't mind, sharing what you shared with us in that session.
Yeah, it does. When we pulled it up in the map and we measured out 60 feet, including that lane on the adjacent property, it did look like it would encompass a significant portion of the proposed property. That's not to say that you couldn't pursue something like that, do a full lane and, or a full street, a 60-foot right of way. And that may get you some level of development that would work for you, and not impede the other property owner. Obviously, a 60-foot right of way brings a higher cost, but that's something that you guys could work through.
I get you. So you're suggesting that the portion of the flag lot would include that public road?
Yeah, you would take
Okay.
your private lane and their private lane, and you would combine them with the extra property on your side to make the full 60-foot right of way.
And then we would be required with that 60 feet I think it's 25 or 30 feet from the back of the sidewalk or the edge of the sidewalk.
That's right. So it's 30 feet without a sidewalk, and if you're doing a street, then you would put in the sidewalk, so it'd be 25 feet.
25 feet. Okay. That's interesting. And that would be something we'd collaborate with on the owner in the back there, the Welton property.
That's right.
Okay.
Another potential option, and yeah, thank you.
The problem is that when you get to.
It's a significant portion.
Yeah, still is quite a significant, because then you got to go 25 still from there.
Yeah, so like this one's.
25.
And
And
then
the-
you're doing another 20,
Yeah, even so then we'd still,
so you're at 50 now.
Sorry. So how wide is that proposed one, 25?
yeah, we're at 25 or 26 or so.
Yeah, so you're right at 50. When you combine the two, I mean, as separate, if you combine them, you'd actually lose, you'd be 10 more feet into the property.
Another potential option, which we didn't discuss in the work meeting, as I've just been thinking about this, and I don't know this would fit, you'd have to take it back and think through it, would be to do two duplexes. So duplex, you do two fronting north, 100 north, and you'd still come down the private lane, and you'd have them back each other, and you'd have another set of units back there too.
Gotcha.
That may fit.
Because what's the minimum width for a private lane? Is it 20, 30,
Your
You know.
private lane has to be 26.
26? Okay, minimum.
And if it's facing the side instead of the garage, then you don't have to push the units down.
Right, right. We could put that and then have the driveways come out and around to the private lane.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that might be something that we propose. Because I think as things are, I'll take this back to the owner and discuss what they'd like to do. But I think that is the most viable option. That was where I was going to go next, is just attempting to reconfigure blocks of space on the lot to see what would fit. Awesome. And then anything else, I think addressing most other things are fairly simply addressed, the items from the review. And I think a lot of this is my fault telling my engineers. As I went back, I was like, man, I swear I saw it was an 8-foot setback, but that was for accessory dwelling units. It wasn't for the actual residential units. So that was my fault. But yeah, those are pretty negligible, pushing those setbacks and a couple feet this way and that way and so on. Yeah,
If I could, sir.
Sure.
And Mr. Chair, just one more thing on our principal setbacks. In the RM15 zone, the minimum setback between structures on the same lot is 50 feet. So gauge that would put one building at the very back and probably one at the front as much as you can. Just think through that as you guys are
Gotcha.
working on that.
Yeah, I did see those. I actually printed those out too.
That's in our table.
So 50 feet, so that would more or less in that configuration, we'd have one up as far front as we possibly could, and we'd need 50 feet between. And that would be yard space, I assume.
It depends on how you do it. I mean, I would assume that you would have, if you did a good design, you potentially could have the buildings up front facing the street and not necessarily driveways on the street,
That's true.
and still have the garages in the back. So you could have two garages face each other.
And so if we did something similar to that, the permissibility of a shared driveway. So we have the private lane that would get between those units and then a shared driveway. Yeah, like what's the, is that also considered a private lane then if you did kind of share those between two of those duplexes? Does that make, I'm not being very clear, but you know what I'm saying? If we have the two, well, actually, never mind. I think I got a better idea. Sorry. So disregard that. Sorry. You're fine.
So a couple of options sound like to think through. That was the first thing, is that 60-foot road option. The second one is you'd made a reference to this garage that I wasn't familiar with. I was hoping you could clarify for me. And that was this dental implant kind of analogy. If you wouldn't mind helping me visualize that a little bit better.
And I don't know, I doubt that it would work because I think the safety issue here is that having a place where you would access your front door via walking also double as a driveway, I think is the reason for such requirements and so on. Basically what I was suggesting is just in an attempt to get a 25-foot driveway to the private lane, we would in essence fill, we would push the garage only into the footprint of the building and leave the structure of the building as close as permissible to the private lane, which I'm pretty sure there's probably a setback requirement for that structure too. So that's why, again, it was a creative option so that, I don't know if that was clear enough to kind of address that.
And I'm assuming that would also increase the height of the building as you pushing back, you would raise up and do a second story, or I don't know if you're planning on doing a second story.
Yeah, the plan is to do a second story. Overall, that I think the owner, I mean, and this is all preliminary, but the hope was to get a master suite, a 2-car garage and kitchen, generally speaking, and kind of a living room combo on the first floor. And then upstairs was the idea was bedrooms and other living spaces as would fit. So it was kind of a stacked design was what the hope was. We have not taken it to any architectural firms yet, so none of that's in stone at all, but that just was the hope of the owner.
Okay, so it sounds like we're still exploring options on this one.
Yeah.
The third thought I had was just related to some of these options. And by the way, I like the back-to-back garage better than this one, but I've seen this done before too. And I've seen it done where it looks really horrendous and ugly, and times when it's done well and it doesn't look as bad. But that's where, and I don't know if there's height restrictions in, for that or what those height restrictions are. I know there are some, but you basically have the garage on the first level. So you have this 2-car garage and stairs going up. Then you have your family area on the second level, and maybe the family, the kitchen, a bathroom, and then a third level where you have a couple of bedrooms, another bathroom. And that's common in cities where there's more dense development, and have these narrow lane requirements and still get the garages in there, but you're not taking living space for that because it's all above.
Right.
So that may or may not be something that can work with. We'd have to look at what the ordinance is on height and so forth. And if we pursued anything like that, it'd need to look nice.
Right.
Because it can look terrible.
It could, yeah. And I'd actually be curious to anyone involved in that, what the consensus might be if that was the proposal. Because you can get roughly if we could fit, and that might be what we're kind of down to. With the width of the lots we have there is doing something similar to that, where we'll have enough room for a 2-car garage and a stairway to get up to the living space. And I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 35 is the maximum, which is pretty high. It would in those, the buildings essentially would be roughly, and this is rough math, but roughly 50 feet square. And then if we did maximize at 35, that would be a pretty tall looking building. Like it would be taller than what's around that area for sure.
And
But-
be tall and skinny.
Yeah.
So I don't know, those are things that you can work with city staff.
Okay.
To see if that's an option at all as well. All right, so I know there's a recommendation from staff to, you're going to come back with a redesign, it sounds like. And so, with the recommendations that we continue this discussion to our next agenda in June, which we can take that action in a moment. But before doing that, so far the dialogue's been between us. I want to make sure everyone on the commission's had a chance to share their thoughts. I know in the work session, there were a couple of other ideas that came out. So I'll just open it up to the commission right now.
Mr. Chair, if I can go first, Ty or whoever was running the mouse and doing the measuring up there, could you measure the width? I can't find that on my computer here of that little stem road going back into the Weldon property. Yep. Yeah, what did we have on width for that? Okay, so we were talking about how he may not want to give that road up because it would limit him in the future. 24 feet isn't enough for a private lane back in there if he wanted to do anything ever. What would that do in the future if he could never do? He's got, the way I look at the tax roll stuff, he's got 0.69 acres versus the property we're talking about to 0.35. But as far as a development like this, if he only has 24 feet, he can't do anything other than what's there, which if you guys approach him about this, there may be a way to work something out and say, well, maybe we do 3 and you could do 2 or something, but because he's not going to be able to do anything as of now, if he's considering that a limiting factor, maybe you could get a better driveway, you do your thing, and he's still only going to be able to have what he has. Anyways, I just noticed that's something to think about when or if you approach him.
That was just, again, it was a 30-foot requirement for 26 requirements. So we're just a couple feet. So he doesn't have, that's okay. Okay, got it.
Unless I'm wrong on that, but
You're correct.
Thank you. So that's an option. Work something out with the other developer on how many units you want to allocate between the two of you to access the same lane. The other option that I'd heard too, and it sounds like you're amenable to it, is rather than a fourplex, if that's just not feasible on this piece of property, coming back to the drawing board with 3 units or 2 or whatever might fit on there. So that's something to consider. And someone, I think it might have been you in the work session, shared that as well. So anything else that we can share on this one? We're not ready to take any action on the concept plan because it needs to be redesigned, but anything else? Seeing some heads shake. Dan, virtually, your head's shaking too. Okay, which is good because then you can hear me still. Let me call for a motion then to continue this to the meeting if somebody wants to present that.
Mr. Chair, I'd be willing to make a motion to continue the review of the concept plan for 127 East, 100 North until our June meeting.
Thank you for that. Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Justin. Any discussion prior to voting? Seeing no comments, let's go ahead and vote. Please indicate if you're in favor of the motion to continue this concept plan discussion to our June meeting. All in favor? And I see hands online. Looks like that's unanimous, Teresa. Thank you. A motion passes to continue. That takes us through our second agenda item. For our third agenda item, this is kind of a working project that that's been ongoing, I would say, for a couple of years with respect to how we want to better integrate mixed use within the municipal code of Morgan City. How that can fit in with the general plan redevelopment that's taking place currently as a simultaneous project, and making sure that this fits in. There were a couple of assignments from the last meeting. One was for Mr. Apolloni to look at some code language in other jurisdictions that we could start to contemplate and maybe start to get the basis of a recommendation to send to the city council. The other was for me to work with the city And I have not come into the city yet to do that. So we have the first part, but not the second part. There's some preliminary work that we've had historically leading up to some of this, but let's turn the time over to Mr. Apolloni. He's got a PowerPoint to review some of this with us. So hopefully you'll be able to see it when the screen is shared, and we'll do that now.
Bear with us. We're just going to run through some technology problems here real quick.
I know I tried to lift mine up.
In that general area, so close to the river, as far as digging into for a sub, even if it's just 3 or 4 feet, do we know water table or floodplain or? We probably want to get this discussion on the record. So if we're going to discuss this further, we should. Sure. Mr. Chair, if
Are
you,
we ready?
you can discuss what you'd like to discuss for a second.
Okay, well, part of the question I think was going to require some of your attention as well. So
I apologize. We can disregard. I was just trying to think.
it's okay to ask the question. Let's just make sure we have it recorded and into the microphone. So
Sure.
if you want to repose that, that's fine.
So my question was just a candid question of in that general area as far as going sub ground level with any sort of excavating for not necessarily a full basement, but perhaps recessing the garage down into the ground as far as permissible by whatever soils will allow there, in an effort to keep the height of the building above, lower is kind of the idea. So just a general inquiry of what might be permissible there. We'd want to discuss that with our engineering department. Generally, I think that could work. We have basements, but that is something that we'd want to discuss with our engineer. Thank you.
All right, the floor is yours, Weston.
Okay. All right. I want to be brief in what I go over with you, mainly because I think it would be good to get a good context of what the commission is looking for, what the city is looking for as far as mixed use. Mixed use means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There's different facets of it. So I'm going to cover a little bit of what we talked about last time and some key aspects of mixed use that I've pulled from a few ordinances that are just general aspects of what you're going to see. We'll just go through a few of those points. So let's just talk in general about a mixed use building where you either have a retail or an office below and residential above, or potentially retail and office mixed use. When you're dealing with this type of development, you're going to see wider sidewalks in general. You might see street trees, eating areas, obviously a more active environment, cars on the road or on-street parking, signage that is more pedestrian focused. What you don't see is where the additional parking is. That's usually because the ordinances require it to be behind the front setback of the building on the side or the rear. And so those things have to be taken into account when we go through an ordinance. When we're looking at mixed use buildings, let me just move this so you can see. When we're looking at mixed use buildings, the corner units are really important, especially corner units on really important roadways. We want to focus on emphasizing them through different uses of materials, brick, rock, cement boarding, stucco. We want them to stand out and be focal points. This is a picture from Bountiful. You can see that they've done a good job in making that unit stand out. A couple of just the key aspects is you have a recessed archway, a decorative balcony, and a different roof and a higher height that separates it from the rest of the building. These are critical parts of bringing in an attractive mixed-use building into the city. Okay, so, and I'm not sure why that image isn't pulling up. There was a picture there.
There an animation, if you hit it,
I don't-
advance it, it'll show up.
I don't think so. Oh, maybe. There you go. We also want to look at pedestrian-focused multifamily housing. This is an important part of mixed-use developments. And this fits more into the broader context of what mixed use is. When we're looking at mixed use, we don't always want to just look at an individual building that has a mix of uses. Rather, the context of the city having mixed uses. And so this would be something that we would facilitate next to a commercial corridor or a commercial center and create it to be pedestrian friendly. So that would be, sidewalks and walkways leading towards the commercial development that is easy to connect pedestrians. You're also going to see different things like the porches, the dormers that differentiate the individual units. Garages are generally in the rear. These types of units face the road or they face a courtyard when they're internally set that then lead to the public right of way. All these components lead to creating a more walkable and inviting space. One thing I should note in this doesn't dismiss the vehicles. And there was a comment earlier by Mr. Woods that discussed that talked about making sure vehicles can fit, making sure a truck can fit. And that can definitely be a part of this. We can amend the ordinance to make sure that garages have a significant depth to fit the vehicles that we're looking for. And so it's not to negate or to move away from vehicles, but to accept the viability of a walkable neighborhood. So the other aspect that we briefly talked about is a light commercial industrial flex space. This isn't normally what people think about when you think about mixed use, but is a very effective way of bringing in or opening business to new uses. If you think about your commercial centers or even your industrial centers that may preclude certain uses. So you may have someone that is doing 3D printing or laser cutting that's not a heavy industrial use, but isn't permitted in a commercial center. And they may not be able to find themselves in a heavy industrial center. And so finding ways to fit these types of users in, providing an allowance for them in an industrial like commercial flex. This is generally brought to a stage where you set it up and say there's a percentage of back of house and a percentage of retail space that's offered in the front, where they can offer their goods and services. Even if they're not actively selling a lot of goods and services, we can require a minimum storefront so that there's still an active use in between the public right of way and the building itself. Okay, so I just want to generally, and this is the last bit I'm going to cover, and then we can have a discussion. I just want to generally talk about how we apply these things. So they can be applied generally in 3 different ways. We could create new zones that fit these types of uses that we're talking about. We can use existing zones and modify setbacks and design criteria. We can create overlay zones. And so an overlay zone would basically allow us to keep the existing zones the way they are. And then in certain areas that the city's identified, which generally would come through the general plan and a lot of forethought through the city's thinking on where we'd want to see these types of developments. we could locate overlay zones, much like the historic overlay, and say, in this specific area, we would have heightened criteria for development. And then I just put a caveat on there, the use of the general plan, that it's such a key aspect of moving the development forward, of where these developments are focused and what we want to see. So I bring those general points up with the context that we are on the cusp of going through a general plan, of having some answers of what the community wants to see. But we can also be actively drafting an ordinance for mixed use and for light industrial flex and for pedestrian friendly and focused multifamily housing. With that, I'll just open it for any questions or discussions that you want to have.
Thank you for that. Appreciate your preparation. I do have one question regarding the scope of mixed use and maybe how we're defining it. So a lot of what we looked at visually and what we talk about is that mixed use of retail or light industrial and maybe residential, but some of these cross uses that are existing buildings, same building that might have multiple uses. I've also seen mixed use in, if we look at compartmentalizing a city, which is what typically happens in suburban sprawl. You have all your homes over here, and then for them to get any services, they leave the neighborhood and drive into a commercial area and get their services. Other ways to define mixed use might be there's a grocery store in that residential neighborhood because that's where the people live and that's easy to get to, and it's not a whole commercial district, but it gives, or a restaurant or a convenience store or something. And I'm curious if the interest of the city and the general plan, if that's been discussed, are we simply talking about more of that traditional view of mixed use with the retail first level and the residents above that? What scope are you thinking of? And I say you, I mean collectively as a city.
Yeah, as far as the general plan process, to the detailed level of mixed use, I don't think we've gotten there. This is something that we should look holistically at all options, because I don't think there's a silver bullet here. And so I think we want to be conscientious that Morgan is a growing community and it's got some interests in specific areas economically that the general plan will help kind of identify. And that can start working through the process of where these uses would really apply. But I really do think that your multifamily, your pedestrian focused multifamily is going to be a very key and viable aspect to your mixed use. And what I mean by that is dealing with your existing commercial. You have good commercial along corridors, and that's not to say let's take over commercial. That's to say let's put it in the right place. Let's put it in a connected location that allows for pedestrian access to what's already there. And there will be projects that come through that we want to see a multifamily building, or excuse me, a mixed use building that has a mix of uses. I should mention, when we're talking about the creation of new zones, one of the focuses, if we look at this and say, if we create a new zone and then the city doesn't proactively rezone or walk through the process of identifying areas and rezone that to that type of mixed use, if the use isn't attractive to developers and they have an option to just develop the way they've developed previously, we won't see mixed use development. The benefit of an overlay is placing it in those areas, and that pushes the developer to say this is what the city wants, and we can walk them through that process.
So tell me more about how the overlay works then, because we have one overlay district, the historic zone.
Yeah.
And that essentially, imposes additional restrictions on the type of development that can go in the already approved zone for the area. And that's accurate. Does that,
Correct.
so does that undergo the same public hearing and process for, impacted property owners to make those kinds of changes, or how does a district get created? And I wasn't understanding the distinction you made, that if we did that, it forces compliance for the will of the city, versus if you leave it up to the developer, they'll keep doing things the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. So for example, in our historic district, if that was still zoned just commercial, and we didn't have that historic overlay, any development that would come in, we might say, we would hope and wish and want you to develop under historic guidelines and these criteria, but we have nothing to hold you to do that. They would meet the code and build out the way they'd want. The historic overlay allows them and allows the city to step in and say, this is a specific district that we've looked at and said, this is how we would like it. And yes, you are correct. An overlay zone imposes generally greater criteria for the developer to follow. So in that, we would be looking at setbacks, design, height, materials, and any other amenity that would be required in that type of development. As far as how that process would work, it would all be up to the Planning Commission and City Council. So currently, certain actions through the historic district, actually, a facade change or anything like that would come before this body. When you introduce an overlay zone, we would also have to set up parameters of who the zoning administrator is and determining who makes those determinations. Is it just a permitted use if they meet all those criteria? Is it something that we want to send to the Planning Commission? Is it something we want to send to the Planning Commission and the City Council?
So right now, just using that parallel, we've set up the historical district where everything they propose has to come before the commission. But that's a choice, right?
It's a
We
choice.
could change that and say, these are the requirements. As long as you comply with that, you're good to go. Here's your permit. And otherwise, it comes before the commission. And you're saying the same thing can apply to an overlay for a mixed use option.
Correct.
Okay. I don't want to see everything on the historic overlay. All right. What other questions? Here's what I like a lot. First of all, despite the monotone expression, I'm very passionate about this mixed use. I think it's an exciting change for the city and can really, infuse some vibrance to who we are as a community, particularly the pedestrian-friendly pieces. I love the walkability, having that capability, the sidewalks being wide, a place to congregate, especially after a year and 3 months of not congregating. That feels even better, just to have some of that and that sense of community. With the respect to the width of the sidewalks, how does that work with all the existing infrastructure that we have? Because even without mixed use, personally, my experience with our city sidewalks is they're too narrow, even without mixed use. I'll go and walk with my wife. I don't walk as much as Councilman London, but I do try to get out and about. And it's hard to stay on those sidewalks that are 3 feet wide. And if you have more than 2 people, it certainly can't happen. So that walkability is a real thing, even beyond this use. I mean, it'd be great. I'd love to see wider sidewalks in the city center, period. Maybe not in the subdivisions, but definitely in the commercial areas. And the only place we have that wide sidewalk now is on Commercial Street, that I'm aware of. There's a little bit wider one right in front of the high school, but that's something that's an infrastructure thing that I think we need to address too, where we'd have to put some of that in place almost first, build it and they will come, kind of a thing. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's a good point. This is a picture, I believe it's from Ogden. And so it's more of a historic location, but, given the context of this image, if you look at where the street tree is and you identify that as the park strip, right? So what they've done is potentially they've concreted a lot of the park strip, and they allowed for street trees. That's an option. You can also require buildings to be set back, a few feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, and require that type of amenity space. And so there is, more flow. There is, we want to be careful about how far we push it back. There is a balance. And so that's something we'd want to look at, and not having too big of a walkway, but something that's significant enough that would be feasible. But yeah, I think there's room to play with it, even in existing sidewalks, if there's a park strip that goes along with it.
Mr. Chair.
Weston, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, and then we'll have Teresa in the room go next.
Okay. So I'm sitting here thinking about this, and we're just stepping off the curb here, getting this thing going. Is there a way that you can see that we can make this kind of a fluid kind of a document that it's still restrictive, that we have control over it, but as things change, that it will still make it so that as the growth starts, that we can kind of control it or change it as it goes along? Have you seen anything like that? I'm not explaining it very well. It's just a lot of these things, like the old general plan, as they said, is over 30 years old now, and things are moving so fast in our economy and our lives and everything. And if growth really starts happening, because one business will build and then another one will come and another one will come because they know that the market's there. Is there a way to keep this thing kind of a fluid thing that you've seen, Weston?
Yeah, I mean, it is going to be a little bit of a fluid thing, especially until the general plan is adopted. And the hard part is it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation. We want to develop these types of properties, but we also want the city's input on where they should go and what places are the best places for this. And that general plan really will speak to that. So we can move through working through code and codifying something that could be then in place for when the general plan is adopted. As far as being flexible, I really think it comes down to having all eyes on the ordinance. But more than likely something will have to change. We'll write an ordinance and try to give as much flexibility and functionality as possible and still require the things we want. And then, the first or second or third time it becomes applicable, we might see how it's not working. And so then we'd need to take it back and redraft it and change it. Generally, those are minor changes. And so as long as, the city is willing to, wade through that process and wade through the development of going through seeing what works and what doesn't, then yeah, I think it would stay a fluid process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. And I like the idea of being able to iterate on this as we go as well. I don't know that we have to start from a base of 0 and just, learn as we go. I think we can start based on experiences of other jurisdictions, maybe learn a little bit from them. Now our situation, every city's different, and so it may not perfectly apply, and then we iterate from there. But I think we look at some learning that's out there that's already happened and go from there instead of starting from 0. Which I don't think that's what you were suggesting anyway, Wes, but just as long as we're fluid. Before your comment, Teresa has the floor.
Mr. Chair, I was just to let you know that we do have some sidewalks that are wider. It's old, but we have a pedestrian plan that obviously needs to be updated. And as we go through this general plan update, there are specific things in our scope of work that will be done with this project that we have, but we're hoping that we'll be able to continue with the city and this company to do more on specific items, maybe on those you were talking about how we walk a lot in the city, that maybe we can do some of those things too. So you'll see some sidewalks are wider because they're part of the pedestrian corridor. The rest are just standard.
Thank you for clarifying that. I love being wrong that way. It's a good thing for the city. Mr. Hopkins, you had a comment.
As we've been dealing with this mixed use concept, although I have seen a great deal of mixed use type construction and use. I lived in Europe for 7 years. Big deal there. I'm having a very difficult time visualizing that in our community. I think I could better do it if we had some places or suggestions of where this, that, or any of these suggestions could be applied, and how I could visualize it there. But I'm really struggling with this without that.
Mr. Chair, can I?
Please.
So to add on to that same thought and concern, I think there's another discussion that's outside the scope of this body, and that's the economic development of the city in general. Are we trying to grow it with people that are entrepreneurs and people that are business owners inside the community as it exists now? Are we trying to attract that development from outside? I know that's not inside of our scope. So, but that said, I think part of it comes down to that. Are we at the mercy then of developers who come to the city with these ideas to say, we want to put this mixed use on this particular piece of property? Or do we have those areas defined where we think that's right? And I'll take it a step further, and forgive me if it's just in my ignorance that I don't know the answer to this, but who is actually responsible, and I'd say outside of just us putting the general plan together, to find people that want to invest in the town, whether that is internal or external, so that as we make plans and say, well, we would like to create this zone or overlay for mixed use, we have that vision there, right? Plan's great. Execution is going to be the key though. So that's my question. So who specifically is responsible for that?
Yeah, I would lean on our city manager, Ty. He would be the main point person. Teresa, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but he would be our main point person for economic growth and development.
Solely, is it Ty? Is there just him? Who else?
Well, currently how the city is based, we don't have a specific economic development person that's all they do. We though have, Ty is our economic development, works a lot with the chamber, works with the county, has one at this time. The county economic development person is on I believe a contract at this time, so it's not a permanent position. We've talked about working a little bit more with economic development, but we're still in the starting stages of those. There's grants and et cetera that are more available. And so as Ty learns more of those, we are able to at least present them to people. But right now we're not actively recruiting to have people come in. We're not at that point.
To address Mr. Hopkins, Commissioner Hopkins' concerns, you bring up a really valid point. And when I stated earlier, like mixed use has a different context in people's minds. It also invites different feelings towards it, whether good or bad, based on the community that they live in and how what context and how would that fit in. It is. In general, mixed use is a viable, one of the things that we didn't really cover is, mixed use is also less impactful on our utilities. It's cheaper for the city. It generally, there's a lot of benefit in developing that way, but it has to be done right. And it is hard to find really good quality projects. They're coming online a lot more now. And I think the key part is finding what you like and what you don't like. One of the standouts in our community, in the surrounding community, is Daybreak. That has a lot of good stuff, but sometimes it's hard to separate the density that they have there from what we would have down here. And so it can be difficult to separate those and say, I like that building. I like how it's next to residential. I just don't want 5 stories, that type of thing. So Daybreak has definitely some stuff. There is projects going on in Ogden and Clearfield and Layton, honestly, all across the Wasatch Front that is pushing mixed use development. And so, maybe we need to have a session where, I know we initially did this, but it didn't, come to full fruition, but we do bring together a series of ideas and concepts and images of what everybody is looking for in mixed use and what it really means to us, so we can have an understanding. And part of that could come with drafting a code. That doesn't really answer your question. I'm not trying to sidestep it, but it is a difficult thing. We could probably, list out a few properties. And I have a few at the top of my mind that I can think of that you could look at that are in general inviting mixed use and are focusing on mixed use and how they can be applied in the community.
Well, I think I could say I'm not particularly against mixed use. Historically, I can point out to you where we've had it.
Yeah.
But right now, I can't visualize where I would want to see it.
Yeah, that's fair. And I don't think that's a negative stance. It's just a recognition of what the use is and that it's different from how we've operated. And we want to be very thoughtful about where we place this and what it looks like.
And maybe with respect to the types of visualizations that you're talking about, I do like the idea of continuing the brainstorm, people bringing in more examples of how that's envisioned so that we can look at it. And I have a hunch that will fall into 2 categories. One will be more the non-traditional type of mixed use, which I think we need. And then I think we'll see more of what we're looking at on the screen right now, type of mixed use, which reminds me of how Disney does it. When those of you that have been there, you walk down Main Street, USA, that's like the perfect city, right? With pedestrian friendly, and you got restaurants and retail and pretend residents above it. But that's kind of this romantic view of what mixed use can be. And it feels like the code, as we create this, needs to accommodate both. And to Mr. Hopkins' point as to, well, where, that to me is part of our how. And you talked about an overlay where this can be enforced and required. If we want this, we have to be intentional about it, because I don't think it's just going to happen piecemeal, where this developer decides it's time to come in and do a piece and someone else comes in, they choose not to, and it's not going to work. You're not going to have that kind of feeling. And it feels like, in addition to the economic development part of this, and bringing in folks, there almost needs to be a commitment, I believe, from the city to invest in, some of, this vision. So there's a focal point, there's a place for these developers then to kind of work through. And when I say a focal point, I'm talking about, coming back earlier to that town square type of concept. Commercial Street's tough because you only have half a street, you don't have the other side. Where else can we have a focal point where maybe there's a little amphitheater and things spread out, or there's a place where, a local band can be out in the congregation area and be playing, and people have their diners where there's some patio seating, you can sit out and be part of that. That's one vision of what this might be. It's not the only vision, but it does feel like we need to create something to, the chicken and egg thing to help spur this. Whatever that focal point might be, to build this around. That to me is how we, where we put some of these zones and overlay districts. That's starting to feel like, we need the examples, of course, but it's starting to feel like that might be more of the how.
Sure.
I have a comment addressing George's concern. It really spurred me on his not liking it. I think that we're going to get growth business wise in Morgan City, however it is. And my views from the business standpoint, I think this mixed use would attract more small individual businesses, the mom and pop types, local businesses versus a big company coming in, having enough money to buy up a block, tear down a bunch of houses and build, something mall type situation. And so it's just a thought that by doing this mixed use and these small units below the living areas, I think that it would draw smaller businesses to our area instead of these giant companies that are nationwide things. And for me, I think it'd be a good thing. I mean, businesses are going to follow growth in cities. It has everywhere out west of Layton out there. And I think that it's just a thought that I think this would be a positive as far as what kind of growth we would want as far as businesses in this mixed use area.
Thank you for that. Here's what I'd like to do at this point. I'd like to wrap up this conversation at 8:30. That gives us about 7 more minutes. And what I want to do in that 7 minutes is maybe brainstorm a little bit of where we go from here. So there's one outstanding assignment that I have that I'll try to be more diligent on in the coming weeks to come back as prepared as Mr. Apolloni was. And then it was suggested during the course of this meeting to again solicit from everyone that's here ideas of how you envision, pictures, visuals of mixed use that you feel is the kind of mixed use you'd like to see in Morgan that fits. And then I think we continue to have the conversation that we're having. I'm starting to feel some structure, with the two types of mixed use, the overlay, the infrastructure, the width of sidewalks. It feels like there's some things, some points that we can take away that have been nicely outlined in this presentation. What else that we can take away, Teresa?
So, Mr. Chair, this is just a suggestion is that going to a city that's maybe had a new revision to the general plan that is going towards these mixed use. I could tell you a few of them that I've looked at to see how they've done the overlay on those districts, and then be able to see what's there now and what they're thinking will be presented. It kind of helps you with a picture. There's an older area in Salt Lake that they're doing a historic general plan update that they're implementing, and it's taking an older area. What do you do with these? How can we fix these? And it's a very good description of what will happen. And so now you'll have a developer that's going to come into maybe a Kmart or Smith's that went under or whatever it might be, and they go to present something. Now there's a historic, not a historic overlay, but an overlay or something that now gives them specific guidelines of this is what we're looking for. And then they'll have to, it helps them to generate that mindset. This is what the city's looking for, instead of, what can I do with this? And the city's saying, well, I can't really tell you because we're not sure. You need to have those focus groups. But anyway, so a suggestion is to look on a couple of cities' websites, show what their overlay, and then maybe go see what those overlay looks like. It might give you an idea if that's something we want to see. There's several cities like that.
I think that's a good suggestion. Is there anyone interested in taking that on and looking at a couple of other jurisdiction sites and seeing how they brought this together?
A mixed use sometimes is we keep looking at big scale, but mixed use can be on a much smaller scale, but still look as inviting as these pictures up here.
Mm-hmm. good reminder.
Mr. Chair, if I can, this is a little bit, maybe to answer George's question, just take a couple minutes. I've thought a lot about this since we brought this up, and I actually have a couple areas where I do picture this happening. We've got commercial highway over right directly behind my house with the new Mountain Vista subdivisions. Is it something we could potentially allow some of this in this little strip of commercial highway and kind of tailor the businesses to, get your little corner grocery store? There's a lot of growth over there. There's a lot of houses. Can we get our little corner grocery store where you can walk to get the necessities, maybe your little cafe that the young dealerships, and there's a big piece of agriculture. Who knows what could go in there that give them a place to walk for lunch. You see the people walking from the bank over to the gas station. There's a lot of business. There's a lot of people over there with nowhere to go. I did some quick math over by the Fox Point subdivision. There's about 80 acres of one property owner that's agriculture now, 140-ish acres total of agriculture there. In that, can we work this to where we want a percentage of that? Yeah, it's in a residential neighborhood, but do we want the exact same residential neighborhood we've got with that Fox Point subdivision, or in the middle of all that agriculture, there's another more agriculture over to the, I guess it'd be north side of Young Street and the Pheasant Run subdivision? Can we work this to where we want a small percentage of that to be in the middle of that subdivision, your mixed use stuff, to maybe get that little cafe or the little ice cream shop or something back in that neighborhood? And being mixed use, I think, I remember a discussion in some with the city where people don't want to go build an office park because residential apartments, that's guaranteed money in your pocket, but no one wants to build a little office park. But could we maybe draw in some of these little businesses, that corner grocery store, the yogurt shop, some of that stuff you get in late when you go down there that my wife likes to go to? Can we maybe draw some of this stuff in where they know they can make their money on the apartments upstairs and let these little businesses in downstairs, and try and get some of this stuff maybe central in that neighborhood? I mean, you look at this, there's a lot of houses around some of this stuff. Would it be enough to support one of these little businesses? You locate it to where you got your main arterial streets through the subdivision, make it so people coming from outside that area, easy access to your main roads, and try and lay this out to where it's walkable, but still easily accessible from your farther areas and bike traffic, all that stuff. Anyways, I've thought a lot about this, and that's kind of where I picture, offhand, some of this maybe going. I mean, it is a different way of looking at it rather than that exact same subdivision clear through to East Canyon Creek, but maybe there is a place for a little piece of mixed use in the middle of that somewhere.
This is the kind of brainstorm that I think can help us bring these visions to life. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure, can I ask one more?
Yeah, please.
Just very quickly. So to my further point, if Ty Bailey is our city economic developer or encourager, if it's something of homework, I think meeting with him to talk about what he's done, and even with the county economic development team, whatever capacity, would be helpful for us. Not to make those decisions, but just to see the vision where they're going, would help us kind of create that plan around where they see it going.
Let's see the vision. Maybe we could give an assignment to Ty.
He's not here, so it's appropriate.
Exactly. He left the room. It's his fault. The other one, because I do want to wrap up. I said 8:30. I think it's 8:30 now, but maybe all of us then do the first takeaway, which is to do some exploring, be cognizant of the communities we're driving through, what resonates with us, what we think is a fit for the type of community that we want to codify within Morgan. Take some pictures, but then also I think all of us could benefit from being familiar with some of these codes, and not just have city staff do the research and share it with us. Now, ultimately, it'll come down to some of that, and we'll have a lot of input on how that goes. But for now, I think if all of us come back with at least one example from some jurisdiction research that we've done and one example of a visual of what we've liked, we'll be that much closer to bringing this to fruition. So let's set that as the assignment. I'm hoping to do a better job this month of following up. Teresa, can you help me with that? And we'll get some of the points that we've talked about summarized even outside of the minutes. Let's get them out to the commission members, and you can work with me to kind of tighten those up. But
Mr. Chair, could I add one caveat to that?
you can add one
Maybe-
caveat.
Maybe not a caveat, but just if you see something you don't like too, I think that's a very appropriate thing to identify. If there's a mixed use project, or even not a mixed use, and just say a development that stands out as this is not what we're trying to create, that can be just as effective. And so definitely find things you like, but if there's something clear that we need to make sure we don't want to do, then we should know that too.
I like that. So examples that are favorable and those that you want to steer away from. Thank you. All right, let's wrap up there. If we can get a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Meeting adjourned.